we need to pay for the energy that we put into the grid because there's an overproduction. It happens. It happened, for example, in Netherlands. That's the record for last year, and it happened in a lot of countries nowadays. Now, welcome to the second part of the manual day, which will be focused on energy storage and hybrid systems. So, to better understand why do we need energy storage in PV sector, we should get a bigger picture on the energy sector itself. So, historically speaking, energy market was pretty simple. There was those who generated energy, so the generators, and those who consumed energy, so consumers, or what we call the load. Between them, there is transition network, which means which enables electricity to flow from one to the other. For electrical network to properly work, the load needs to meet the generation. That means that the production needs to be at the same level as the consumption at any given time. This is a bit tricky because the demand is not constant. It depends on the hour of the day, of the season of the year, the geographic location of the country, and all other different factors. So this is a typical load profile. As I said, it depends on the country, so it can depend on the climate and on the season of the year. For example, in northern countries, we will have higher demand in winter because days are shorter and colder. But what we can determine for sure is that we have two major peaks. One in the beginning of the day, when we prepare for the day, and one at the end, when we are back from work and we are finishing the day. So this happens in most of the countries. What it means for the energy sector? It means that the energy will be supplied by different generators depending on the hour. So there is base load, which means generators that will run almost always. So these generators need to be stable and use low-cost fuel. Then we have middle load and peak load. These generators will run half of the day or only several hours. And this needs to be much more flexible. And historically, it's been gas and coal power plants. The thing is, now we're in the middle of energy transition towards renewable sources. And there are two reasons for that. The first one is that fossil fuels are limited, which means they will run out eventually. So we need to prepare for that, and we need to change our energy sources to those that we can use in the future. The second reason is that in 2015, the whole world signed Paris Agreement, which states that in order to protect our climate, we need to move to a free carbon economy. That means we need to install more and more renewable energy sources. And it gives us a lot of new challenges in the energy sector. But what it means is that we need to install more power plants on the generation side, for example, wind turbines, but also more renewable sources like solar on the distribution network. And so the consumers become prosumers, producing energy, but also consuming energy. On the energy market, it means that these prosumers need to be involved on the market, which means they need to earn money from the energy that they produce. There needs to be a more flexible way to exchange data about production and consumption, and also energy flow in the distribution network. So the distribution network will become much more flexible and more complex. The problem with solar is that the production does not meet the consumption during the best hours of production. So in the middle of the day, the production is the highest and the consumption is between its two peaks. We can see as an example of California. So here is shown the net demand, which is the demand minus wind and solar. So this is the curve that needs to be supplied from energy sources that are different than solar and wind. So as we can see, in 5 years, we changed from what was called duck curve into canyon curve. So in the middle of the day, almost all consumption is supplied by renewable energy sources, which is good. But these renewable sources are not available for the rest of the day. So that means installing more and more solar capacity won't be the only solution to energy transition. So we need to find solutions for that. The first solution, the most obvious, would be to install energy storage near power plants. So when there is overproduction, the energy will be stored in this energy storage and used later when the consumption is higher. However, these big-scale energy storage are really expensive, and there are no clear laws that enables them to make profit yet. So the investment takes a long time. Another solution would be to change the demand curve. So as we can see on the slide, there should be a shift of energy from the evening to the middle of the day. And that's why a lot of governments are encouraging consumers to increase their flexibility regarding electricity usage, meaning increasing electrification of their home appliances, invest in energy storage, or make their houses smart homes. So there are different solutions to shift the habits, to change the habits and shift the energy consumption from the evening to the middle of the day. Now, as we can see the bigger picture and why the government is pushing for changing the habits and increasing energy storage, we can focus on PV sector. So why do we use energy storage as a prosumer? So first, it would be increasing self-consumption. As we can see, that is the data of one of our clients. So the production is the highest in the middle of the day, and his consumption is rather low. But in the evening and in the morning, he has higher consumption, and there is no production during that time. So what we can do about it? We can store that energy from the middle of the day and use it in the evening and in the morning using energy stored. So a battery with the inverter. The second reason for the energy storage would be energy storage trading, which means profits that comes from owning an energy store. The first one is electricity arbitrage, which means buying energy when it's cheap and selling energy when it's expensive. So on the same chart, I put the energy prices, average energy prices in Europe for this particular day. So as we can see, when the production is highest, the energy price is the lowest. So on the right, you can see that, for example, for the hour when he produced the most energy, so 5 kilowatts, the energy price was only 0.01 euro. So he would get 5 cents in this particular hour for all the energy he produced. But later, at 5 p.m., For less energy that he produced, so 3.5 kilowatt hour, he would get 5 times more money, even if he produced less energy. The ideal situation would be to shift the highest production from the middle of the day to the hour when the energy price is the highest. And that would mean that he would get 70 cents, which is over 14 times more than what he gets normally. So that's the first benefit. And this is if the curve looks like it looked on the previous slide. But what happens now in many countries is that the energy price in the middle of the day hits 0. So in the middle of the day, we wouldn't get any money for the energy that we produce. And what happens in more and more countries, is that we have negative prices, which means that during some hours, we need to pay for the energy that we put into the grid because there's an overproduction. It happened, for example, in Netherlands. That's the record for last year. And it happened in a lot of countries nowadays. So feeding energy to the grid wouldn't be beneficial for us. Of course, there are different schemes of net metering or net billing, but what we can see from the history, every market, by the time that the PV is advanced, moves towards net billing based on the energy price in that exact hour that you produce energy. So another solution would be demand-side response. So what it is? The demand-side response means the load reduction during the peak demand. So you sign an agreement with the distributor saying that you can limit your loads when the demand is high, so he doesn't have a problem with over demand. It can work both ways. So when the prices are negative, so we have overproduction, you can start consuming more, so charging your energy store. And nowadays, in a lot of countries, we have different instruments that are signing agreements with individual prosumers and aggregating all the prosumers, making it one big energy storage, and then signing the agreement with the operator. So we can look it up in your country if such systems works, and you can then be a part of the demand response scheme. The third reason why we would need independence from the grid is the emergency power supply. So in some countries, we have problem with stability of the grid. A good example is South Africa. So this is a website of their energy provider, which shows us, depending on the stages of what they call load shading, you can have or not have electricity during the day. So if the stage of load shading is really bad, then for the half of the day, you won't have electricity at all. So the solution here would be to charge the energy store when you have energy and discharge it when you don't. And in this case, you would be independent from the grid, so have your own energy supply. Another problem that we encounter is high voltage in the grid. In the countries when we have too much energy in the grid, so the voltage goes too high. The inverter, because of the network code, needs to shut off if the voltage is 10% higher than standard. So in this case, it means 253 volts. If the voltage gets too high, the inverter needs to shut off and wait for the voltage of the grid to go back to normal. And that translates into this kind of graph. So as you can see, the inverter is shutting off and on, depending if the voltage on the grid is high or low. So when the voltage is high, it shuts off. waits for the grid voltage to go back to normal, but then by production increase the voltage in the grid and needs to shut down again. So that's what production during one of these days look like. So as you can see, we get half or even less of the production that we would get in normal situation. So if we have a hybrid inverter, it can disconnect from the grid if it gets too high voltage and just charge the battery in that period. Okay, so now let's go to the energy storage in residential PV sector. So what it means for installers and for prosumers. There are different categories of batteries, and you can use a lot of them. But what most of the producers decided on is lithium ion because of its high density. So with the same capacity of battery, you will get smaller and lighter batteries with lithium ion. And regarding all other categories, they chose LFP standard because of its lifespan, first because of its safety, and also the specific energy. So how to store energy in PV hybrid system? We have different parameters in hybrid system. But first, let's talk about the inverter. We have on-grid inverter and off-grid inverter. They both have their advantages and disadvantages. So the on-grid inverter works only with the grid, and it's depending on the government. And the self-consumption, so the energy that you consume, the energy produced that you consume, is only 20–30%, so quite low. But it's also the simplest solution and the cheapest one. That's why in a lot of developing countries, we first install on-grid inverters. The off-grid inverters can be used everywhere. There are no regulation. It's a standalone solution. So you can put it anywhere you want, and nobody will have a problem with that. The problem is that the off-grid inverter has limited amount of energy and limited battery life. So it only runs if there is sun and if your battery is full. Then we have the hybrid system, which can connect these two solutions. So it can work on grid when we are connected to the grid, but when there is no energy in the grid, it can switch to off-grid mode. And when the grid comes back, it can work on grid as well. So it works in both of these modes. So here we can see how the hybrid system looks. So we have the grid, the main loads, and then we connect it to the inverter. We have the PV panels, battery, and backup loads. So when the power outage happens, the inverter disconnects from the grid and the main loads and supply backup loads with energy from the battery and from PV panels. An important feature here is the energy meter, which calculates the consumption and the production, so the energy flow to the grid or from the grid. So based on that, that energy flow, it charges or discharges the battery. Now there are two types of energy stores, low voltage battery and high voltage battery. So the first one is low voltage. The batteries are connected in parallel. So they work at approximately 48 volts. In high voltage system, the batteries are connected in series, which increase their voltage. So we get high voltage battery. Of course, we always have the BMS that is connected to the inverter, and that dictates the battery to load, to charge or discharge. The advantage of low voltage battery are they are cost efficient. So if you are looking for a less expensive solution, the low voltage battery would be the low voltage system would be it. And it's also compatible with more types of battery. So not only the one that producer provides, but also different types of like gel battery or lead acid battery. And also because the voltage is lower, it it has a higher safety. But high voltage batteries are for those who have higher demands. So it has a higher discharge power, higher efficiency, and bigger capacity, which means it's more flexible. It can do more. So if you need more energy and more power, then high voltage battery is one to go. Yes, so hybrid systems have different parameters. So the first one would be capacity of battery. So how much energy you have stored. So the capacity battery shown here in kilowatt hour is the total capacity of battery. But that includes a bit of reserve. So what we show in color is usable energy. So the energy we can use without damaging the battery. So here in orange, we show depth of discharge, which says what's the percentage of battery that is discharged, and state of charge, so the level of the battery up till on which the battery is charged. So it is important to pay attention if the producer is referring to usable energy, so the color area, or the capacity of the battery. This graph represents capacity retention in function of cycle numbers. So a cycle is charging and discharging battery to the fullest, but usable energy, of course. So you always need to check the warranty of a producer and see what capacity they guarantee after a specific number of cycles. So for example, it can be 80% after 4,000 cycles or 70% after 6,000 cycles. So these are things that you should look to in the warranty of the battery. Another important parameter is maximum discharge power. So how much power you can dispose. So how much power from the battery you can use. So it will be the list of these three numbers. The first one is maximum discharge power of the battery, so how fast the battery can discharge. The second is maximum power output of the inverter. So the limit can be inverter because the maximum power can be lower than the maximum power of the battery. Then we have maximum power per phase in a three-phase hybrid. So most of the inverters cannot put whole nominal power of the inverter on only one phase. So you need to check what's the percentage of the nominal power of the inverter that you can put on one phase, and depending on that, connect devices to that phase. Then we have additional devices control. So a lot of hybrid inverters not only control the battery, but also you can add other devices, such as EV charger, a heat pump, or smart home appliances. So also a thing that you should know and study before you buy an inverter. Then we have maximum EPS power, which means the maximum power on the backup loads. So this means how many devices you can connect to backup. So what devices will run when the power outage happens. So when the inverter disconnects from the grid, then you need to check what's the maximum power, so you don't connect more devices than you should, because you would overload the inverter. Then we have minimum and maximum power of the system. The minimum would be, of course, the power of a single inverter. But the maximum is not only maximum of one inverter, but the inverters can be paralleled, so they can work together. And it's important also to know, if you need a bigger installation, how they work together. And if you can connect, for example, the batteries and the loads together, or they need to be separate. So if you plan a bigger installation, that's something to consider. Then we have phase unbalanced output. So the amount of energy that the inverter produce per phase. So here on the graph we show a balanced output. So the loads in total takes 10 kilowatt, 2, 3, and 5 respectively on each phase. But because the inverter has a balanced output, it puts 1/3 of this demand power on each phase, so 3.33. What it means is that on the first 2 phases, it will produce more energy, I'll feed it into the grid, and on the third phase, it will take from the grid. This is a problem if you sell energy at a lower prices than you buy it, because it's not profitable for you. That's where unbalanced system comes in. So the unbalanced inverter can produce exact amount of power on each phase, depending on what are your needs. So in this case, it produces 2, 3, and 5 kilowatt on each phase. Of course, still you need to remember what's the maximal output power on one single phase. So if it's 5 kilowatt, then it can work like that. And the last would be EPS switch time. So this is the switch time that happens for the transition from on-grid work with the grid and off-grid work. So when power outage happens, the inverter switch from on-grid to backup and disconnects from the grid. And the important measure here is what is the reaction time, because sometimes it's in seconds. So your whole house would shut down, and then you would need to start. The inverter will start after some time, and you need to check what devices you should use. The other solution is that it's 20 milliseconds or lower. So your devices wouldn't even notice that something happened. So there would be a flick of light or something like that. It would just happen immediately, and you won't even notice that there's been a switch. But from now on, your energy source is the battery and PV panels and not the grid. Then if the inverter detects that the grid is on again, so there is voltage in the grid, it can switch to the on-grid system back. So these are 7 main parameters that you should check choosing your inverter. So think what is the most important feature for you and what inverter can supply it. So thank you for this time and listening to this. Now I would like to invite you for a session with our partner SunGrow, who will talk about their solutions and their insight on the energy market and plans for the future.